property values is profile data update. So let's take a look at that. In this procedure, we're getting the three pieces of information to uniquely identify the profile as well as the profile data values here. So what we do in this third procedure is we try to find the profile ID based upon the username, application name, and whether or not it's anonymous. If we don't get a profile ID, we assume this is a new profile, so we execute a separate sort procedure, profiles insert, which creates a new profile. And then we go down here, and if it is a new profile, we insert our three values into the profile data table with the unique identifier, or rather foreign key, back to the profile. If it's an existing record or profile, then we update the three values in our profile data table. And then once again we execute a store procedure which updates the last activity column in the profiles table. Now the rest of the abstract methods that we have to implement beyond the get and set property values all have to do with operations on groups of profiles. For example, down here on line 195 you can see is a method where we are to delete any inactive profiles, and that's based upon a parameter which is a specified date. So what this method would do is go out, look at all the profiles last activity date, and that's why it's important that we update that value each time we access a profile, and it would delete all of those profiles that have not been active from the specified date. We then have a method after that which is delete all the profiles based on an array of usernames. So essentially here's a bunch of usernames, delete all their profiles. We then have a companion method here where we pass in a collection of profiles and we say, okay, delete all these profiles based upon the usernames that are in the collection of profiles. Next, we have a series of methods that have to do with retrieving profiles. The first one here on line 298 is to find all the inactive profiles based upon a username to match. So we pass in the username, the inactivity date, and then here authentication option is passing in whether or not we're dealing with an anonymous or an authenticated user. So you take all of this information inbound to the method, and it looks up in the database, finds all those profiles, and returns a collection of those profiles. Then we have some other methods here for finding profiles. The next one is find profiles by username, and essentially the key inbound argument here is the username to match. And I should mention that this can be not a fully qualified username, but it could be a couple characters like SAT or something like that. And then you find all the users that start with SAT and return them. Next we have get all inactive profiles based simply on an inactivity date as compared to the previous method up here, which was the inactivity date and the username. We have get all profiles based upon just, in this case, the authentication option, page index, and page size. And then we have a method here that gets us the number of inactive profiles based upon a date and the authentication option. Now what I've done here to simplify the code for us is that each of these methods actually calls another method down here that helps find the appropriate profiles. So let's take a look at the get all profiles method here as an example. We have our inbound arguments, and then it's calling another private method here in our class which passes in the various arguments. In this case we don't have some arguments, so two of these inbound arguments are set to nothing. And we'll scroll down to our methods region, and in here we have two methods. Check parameters is just a little utility method that looks at the page index and page size and just calculates some information for that. We won't take a look at that in any detail. And here's the main method we want to look at, get profile info. So let's expand that. And this receives a number of arguments inbound, as we saw up in the methods above, and it returns a collection of profiles. So essentially what this method is doing is taking these inbound arguments, it's setting up a call to a stored procedure that passes all of those arguments, and the stored procedure is doing the majority of the work by then filtering and retrieving the appropriate profile records that we want, and then down here in this method we're creating a profile for each returned record and putting it into the collection. So we're all done with creating our custom profile provider. Now let's create a website and test it out. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we need to have ASP.NET membership installed in order to test out and use the profile provider. So what I've done is I've created a website ahead of time that has the ASP.NET membership installed, and then we'll build upon that to test out our profile provider. So let's go up here to our solution and add that existing website to our solution, which is right there. And you'll notice the website has a database in it, HDI Profile Provider, and that's the database that we've been looking at when we were creating our custom profile provider over here in this class library project. Also have a web.config in here where I've set up the membership provider related elements. So the first thing we need to do is install our provider here in our website. In order to do that, we need two things. One is we need a reference to our assembly that has the provider in it. So let's add that here. And in this case, what I'm going to do is just reference the project that's in our solution. You could also create a bin folder and add the assembly manually into the bin folder. So the second thing we want to do is to add some information to install our provider in the web.config. So we'll go down here to where we want to put that, and what we want to add is a profile element, and we want to specify the default profile provider, and we'll call that HDI SQL provider. And then we want to add a provider in the provider's element, and the name that we want to give it is HDI SQL provider, and the type is the fully qualified name of our assembly, and that would be profile provider sample. .provider, and lastly HDI profile provider is the class name. Then the connection string we want to use, that is the HDI connection string, which I've set up above and is also being used by the membership provider, as you might see up there on line 68. And the last thing is the application name. And we'll call this HDI videos. Then we have to set up the properties that our provider uses, and we want to add, and what we want for the first one, the name is GMT, and the type is a system.int32. And the allow anonymous we're going to set to true. Then the next one, and the next one that we want to add is called lat, and the type of this is system.single, and we also want to allow anonymous. And the third and last one is long. Type is also system.single, and allow anonymous. Next, let's add a web page where we'll do some operations on our profiles. So we'll add a new web page here, and we'll just take the default ASPX. And the first thing I want to do on this page is we're going to add a login status control. So let's get one of those and bring it over here. And we'll put that right in here. Then we want to add a couple text boxes where we can either view or edit some of the profile